sound of my voice? Can you feel the beat of my heart? Listen to the questions I have. Listen to me. It's all very simple to see what we need. Give us hope. My voice is calling. Can you see? Look in my eyes. Can you feel? My hand is reaching. Give us hope and we'll show you the way.
Well, like any parent, we're just hoping for him to be healthy, have a happy life, good job, have a family. We become grandparents. I was looking forward to him being an adult and having that bond as two adults, as father, son, as adults, because I never had that with my father, because I lost my father when I was 6 years old, so I grew up with no father. In his younger years, he was a very, very happy child, very smart. He loved his music. He was able to pick up songs almost immediately. He lived for hockey, loved his friends, his sisters, his parents. He was just a very happy young boy. He went to the refereeing school out in Trenton. It was about a year after that when things started going downhill for Shane very badly.
Okay. There was a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, not knowing what to do, and you know, it's affected me. It's affected my family. It's affected the people around us. And if I went back in time, I remember where it was very difficult to cope, right? And there was no resources available, you know, in the education system, outside the education system. And being in isolation, you know, when you're supposed to be with the crowd, you know, it hurts. It hurts, and, you know, I don't think anybody should feel that way with their own voice or their own feeling of, I'm not enough, right? And unfortunately, it happens even when you're not isolated. And I think that's the biggest issue, is learning when to talk about when you're not feeling well and not feeling judged.
You know, I was young, so I didn't see the problem. I think the trigger, looking back now, I can say was coming to terms with the fact that I was gay. I knew it. My grandmother raised me, and it was something that I didn't know how I was going to reveal to her, and I think her acceptance was a big part of everything that I did, and I was worried that she might not. I was a little bit chubby at one point when I was younger, and I had just lost, you know, probably about 10 pounds, and I had her come over one day, and she hadn't seen me in probably about a week and a half, and that week and a half, I guess, I lost quite a bit noticeably, and she had seen me, and she was like, oh my God, you look amazing, and that for me was just kind of something that I latched onto, and it snowballed.
I wanted to be a nurse, like my mom. I can very distinctly remember in kindergarten pretending to be a nurse during like playtime. I think my mom was a really important figure in my life, and I wanted to be like her. I worried a lot. I worried a lot about my mom dying or being killed. I worried that my dad was going to come take us. I worried about money a lot. I worried about having enough food. I worried about us being able to pay rent, even as like a 5 and 6 year old child. And I guess that worry that I felt as a kid kind of almost disappeared into this constant worry about food and my weight and what I was eating. And it sort of became kind of like the thing that I thrived in. Like, I was good at being sick. And not that this was the intention, but like it guaranteed that my mom was going to be there for me. Like that I would always have her close and she would protect me, because I guess that's what I wanted. I didn't feel safe. But in turn, it just pushed her away from me.
Me personally, I've dealt with eating disorders, self-harm, I have depression and anxiety, and I'm transgender. So if I had that education when I was younger, it would have been easier for me to know how to help myself in those situations than harming my body. By having this education, it'll help students and youth to know not to do that and to know that's not healthy for you, and to teach them to know that your mental health is more important than school in the long run, because your mental health comes first. Your overall well-being is first.
Shane was he was an honor student all through his schooling, but then in grade 11 is when things started getting really bad, and he would basically stop going to school. He would just all of a sudden just blow up. We didn't know much about mental health or anything at all like that at that point, but we ended up at a clinic, and still wasn't much of any help. They put on these little therapy classes that actually I think made things worse for Shane, because he just absolutely hated them.
Once every 3 days I had to go. I was weighed, psychologists and nutritionists and so on and so forth. But there was a good group of people that were supporting me and able to help me. I wish back then that people would have been more open about it. I think it would have been a lot easier for me to come to terms with and to admit to what was happening and what was going on with me if it wasn't a taboo the way that it was. It is still today, but not as bad.
I think it was really hard for not only my mom but for me to accept help. First of all, this was, this was almost 20 years ago, and I lived in a very small town which had no kind of supports for mental health. My family doctor had no idea what was going on with me. It took him months to diagnose me. My mom did obviously try to help me. She put me into a program in Toronto at Sick Kids for a few months when I was 16. The intention obviously was to have me gain the weight that I had lost because I was very underweight, and kind of get used to eating again. I think kind of it turned into something not good for me. I was kind of on the cusp before I went into Sick Kids, just on the cusp of having anorexia but also being bulimic. And when I left treatment at Sick Kids, it went into full-on bulimia while still being underweight. And, that's kind of been my life.
It began with experts talking about how they recognized that suicide was an issue in Canada. And they would come on when we'd ask them questions about it. But the people who were actually suffering themselves weren't coming on. I mean, that was a lot to ask. It's a national television show, and it takes an awful lot for somebody to come on and talk about that. But what we noticed was, as more and more people talked about it through experts, suddenly the people that we were getting on Canada AM became family and friends of people who were suffering from mental illness. And then we noticed that as acceptance grew and grew, and when you think about it, it happened very quickly. Then the people themselves were coming on. And these were big names. Romeo Dallaire, talking about his depression, his PTSD coming back from Rwanda, and his suicide attempts. I mean, he's a Canadian hero. Arguably Canada's greatest Olympian, Clara Hughes, suddenly came on and openly talked about her depression. What became even more brave were then ordinary Canadians, as if there's such a thing, but just run-of-the-mill people like you and me who worked up the courage to come on national television and talk about what they were going through, and that blew us away. So right now, where we are at our most challenging point, because we've made talking about mental health okay and accepted. Now, are we going to meet people who have the courage to do that? Are we going to meet them halfway?
I think we've somehow developed this society where a lot of youth communities are not listened to, and they're becoming accustomed to not being listened to. the result of not being paid attention to is falling through the cracks, is not receiving proper treatment, is not being taken seriously. It's so hard to admit. It's so hard. It's terrifying. But once it's out there, we have to stand up for ourselves. And then we find others, and then others who can stand up for us, and we can stand up for other people. Right now, it's the only way.
It's not just getting the word out. I guess the thing is, we don't really know what to do. We spend less than any other G8 country on research and development. I have a very close friend who died because of mental illness, and the doctor said to his parents, he said, we just are throwing a cocktail of drugs at him in hopes that something will work because we don't know what to do. And it's just time. That isn't an effective answer anymore. That isn't an acceptable answer anymore, that we just don't know what to do. We have to do the research. We have to do rigorous research and development, and we have to find out what to do.
Most of the time, a child isn't going to say, I want to go into treatment. It's the parent saying, my kid needs treatment. I remember my mom getting so upset and saying, like, screaming at me, are you trying to kill yourself? And I looked her straight in the eye and I said, yes, I'm trying to kill myself. I guess I needed more understanding than institution.
The stage that Shane was at, because his diagnosis was left so late that the mental illness had a very strong hold on him. He could not cope or survive in a daily high school situation like a normal student. So I think what is needed, what would have helped Shane was some sort of residential program where it's supported by the government, not have to be completely funded by a parent. It's going to give them their schooling at the same time, give them the therapy and the skills to cope with what they're dealing with.
Trying to create more of a community, less isolation, causing less separateness, but making people realize that, you don't know what people are going through. You don't know what's going on in their head. And, the earlier we start, promoting this mental health awareness, integrating it into curriculum, showing students from very young that you can learn how to promote wellness in your life. You can learn how to be a person that helps someone else struggling, and getting that feeling of fulfillment. You have to know that you are not alone, and that mental health begins with you.
Stress is a bigger deal now for youth than it has ever been, and the education system is piling that on. And we have to educate the educators now.
In terms of education, mental health is a neglected area within schools. It's an area where it is assumed the school has no responsibility, and that the responsibility, wherever it lies elsewhere, whether it's with the treatment system, whether it's with families, whether it's with the kids themselves. The responsibility is shirked by schools, and there is increasingly a need to challenge the school's responsibilities in terms of mental health services and supports to enable those kids to get an education rather than to be dropping out and leaving school altogether.
Something that we really need to incorporate into our education system is a mental health curriculum, mental health-based curriculum. Mental health is just as important as any type of physical health education. We need to incorporate it because we have to teach our kids to understand themselves and understand what's going on in their own bodies and in their own minds. And because the first place you start to love yourself is when you're able to understand yourself.
Something that a lot of people in this country don't realize, because we as Canadians perceive ourselves to be ahead of the United States on many social issues, is that we're actually quite behind in terms of youth mental health and the supports that are provided in the U.S. In the U.S., there are a number of residential treatment facilities that provide very high quality care for many adolescents who are experiencing mental health issues. In addition, the law in the United States requires that where a student needs a residential schooling environment because of their disability, that is to be publicly funded. And so those types of supports are available in the United States and not available in Canada, and we have a great deal of catching up to do in that regard.
I really just couldn't function, just like feeling like, what am I going to do? like, what is this? Like, what is my life kind of thing? And I can still very clearly remember thinking, like, this is it. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I called my mom, and, you know, she was just casual and normal. And she asked me if I was okay, and I said yes. And I said, I wanted to tell you that I love you. And she said, well, of course. She's like, well, I love you too. And she said, you just gotta hold on. And I didn't know, what am I holding on for? And I said, I love you, and I'll see you later. And I hung up. And I fell asleep. And I woke up 4 days later in the ICU. Things like becoming really good friends with my sister, I would have missed out on. Meeting my husband. Meeting my nieces. Pursuing an art career, a film career. Trying to help people. It would have just been another statistic.
The night of early morning of March 3rd, Shane decided to take his own life. We did not think he was as bad as he was, or as sick as he was feeling at that point. We thought we still had time to try to get him help, but we ran out of time.
Mm-hmm.
That's the absolute worst day of my life. Never forget it was actually his mother who found him first. Just the scream. It's an image that will never leave my mind. When you talk about it more, the actions that you want done, you've got to follow through with these actions, not leave it off to somebody else to do them.
The objective here, the objective of all of it is, how do you make people better? How do we get better? How do we make people feel well again? And that's one of the tenets of this country, is how we treat one another. I mean, when we talk about healthcare and how important it is in this country, really what we are talking about is looking after one another. We gotta look after one another.